Sorry, it's been a few days. You know your boy's busy. Um, and so I have a few uh streams on the backlog. This is one of them. Columbus Day was Monday. Not too many people, not too many people paid attention to it. Everything is so hyper partisan now that literally, I think only conservatives cared that it was Columbus Day. This is completely different from when I was a kid. Um, and I could be wrong because as a kid you don't see politics, so maybe it was political back in the '80s. I don't really think so. I don't think Columbus Day was that political in the '80s, other than on college campuses. Um, there was no Indigenous Peoples Day back then, and I wasn't yet a cynical kid who knew anything about the controversies of Columbus. As a kid, I think up until like the '90s, most kids were taught Columbus discovered America. Hey, Mahal. Um, I'm not doing the one we're talking about. I'll wait till you can go live with me and we'll do that one. So I'm talking about Columbus Day and stuff like that. I did two long runs today, an 8 mile one this afternoon, and I did a 7 mile one this evening. I was going to do a third one, but uh, I started out too late. If I had did my two runs earlier during the day, I would have did my third one in the evening. It would have been my 8 mile in the morning, my 7 mile in the afternoon, and then my 3 mile in the evening. But I'll just have to double up tomorrow. But that was still 15 miles for the day, so that's not bad. Combined 8 and 7. I should do a 9 miler next time. It might, well, remind you of something. Let me stop. Anyway, so um, Columbus Day was Monday. Like I said, it not too many people talked about except for like conservative folks. The only people I think CNN mentioned it, and so far that Donald Trump last week has signed an executive order. Well, Sunday, so 2 weeks now. 2 weeks ago, he signed an executive order mandating that Columbus Day is the federal holiday again, because during the previous administration under Biden, he had named Columbus Day also Indigenous Peoples Day. So I guess it was both holidays. It was still a federal holiday, but the the preference was Indigenous People Day over Columbus Day. And I remember it was around that time crazy stuff was happening. Like they had dumped the Christopher Columbus statue in the inner harbor of Baltimore into the well, they dumped it into the harbor. Um, and similar things were going on. This is sort of like what led to the a bunch of riots, like the one at uh, University of Virginia. So when my wife and I were on honeymoon, I remember the riots that erupted at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia, where a part of my family is from. Since we are related to Jefferson, they are still living right next to the Jeffersonian plantation, where there's now like a Jefferson library and stuff like that. And he was the founder of the University of Virginia as well, by the way. So all of that's in that area. And there was the riots because they were knocking down one of the statues, and so the conservatives and the liberals and progressives were fighting. Um, there was a death protest. There was some white supremacists that came out there with tiki torches, and again, when I remember Trump saying there's good people on both sides, and people thought he was just equivocating and taking out for the white supremacists, but they missed the part where he said there's good people on both sides, but I'm not talking about the white supremacists. He was like, they are not good people. They took that part, they deliberately took that part out of what he said on the air. But he, when he said it was good people on both sides, he was saying there was some people who wanted to preserve these statues as points of American history. So, and similar to that was like the Christopher Columbus statue that was tossed in the harbor like 4 or 5 years ago, and they ended up fishing it out the harbor. And I guess they did some work on it, and it's been re-erected. Pause. And yeah, you know, a lot of Italians took that personally because they see him as an Italian hero. Let me make sure my chat filter is correct, and so let me make sure this live is public. Always gotta keep checking because sometimes I forget to make sure these are public so that people can see them. Um, I'm just checking, guys. Sorry, I don't want there to be dead air, even if there's no one currently in the chat room. What's up, Carlton? At least there's someone in here. Well, the wife was in here. I don't know where she went. She Mrs. Contrarian was in here. I don't know what happened. Um, but yeah, I was just checking to make sure. I guess I don't have to now. I was about to check to make sure that this live stream was publicly um, viewable. Oh, you're still here? Okay, it's weird. So it was showing zero people in the chat room. I'm doing good, man. Thanks for asking. What's going on? I know it's late. I meant to do this earlier. But now that you guys are in here, I'll just go with the flow, and then as people come into the chat, I'll just repeat whatever I said if it needs to be repeated. But yeah, so like I said, this is my sort of coming coming to terms with Columbus Day, because like I said, a lot of people hate Columbus Day, but I was I hated it long before other people did. Like I was talking so much trash about Columbus Day and Christopher Columbus back 35 years ago, man. Like back then I was saying, "Oh, the dude is just a rapist, a murderer, um that he didn't discover anything. How are you going to discover a house where people are already living?" I used to talk all that trash. And I wasn't necessarily wrong, but it was just I was missing some of the finer nuance of it. And so Mrs. Contrarian might be familiar with this too, because in place of Christopher Columbus, the Philippines had Ferdinand Magellan, right? That was who that was, right? Ferdinand Magellan. This is Contrarian, Mahal. But so yeah, I so I used to talk all that trash, I'm I even remember my mom and my stepdad looking at me like, "F he talking about?" Like, because I was trashing Columbus on like Thanksgiving's Day and stuff like that. I remember that's when we were living in Delaware. Oh, there's something new here. Let me try this. Um, I don't know how to. Can you guys see that? Is it covering my face? This this new Q&A thing right here. A guilty pleasure movie or TV show you love. You already can get, well, if it's a movie, it shouldn't be hard to guess with me. Um, trying to drag it so it's not in my face. mm, a song, Batman, Batman. You said it is my face, Mrs. Contrarian. If so, I'm gonna just drag it off the screen. Um, boom. There we go. Um, yeah, it's covering my face. All right, so yeah, I just dragged it off the screen. So anyway, that might be something to play with at another time. Pause. um, uh, but yeah, so like I used to talk trash about him. I talked trash about the Pilgrims and the Puritans. The founding of America. I was so anti-America, and I realized now as an adult and looking at politics that it's not healthy. It wouldn't like individually that's fine, but it's not healthy for an entire country in which its youth is educated to hate its own nation. That is not good for the stability of a nation that a, that the youth of a nation be taught to hate it. That's not very that's not it's not a, that's not a very prudent use of education. Moreover, there is no nation that is squeaky clean. Like every country has its dirt. According to people used to love them some Christopher Columbus. Yeah, so before you guys even came up, like I was saying, man, back in the 80s, like I said, I may be naive because I was a child back in the 80s, but I don't remember it being so hyper partisan. Like I said, when Christopher Columbus came last Monday, the only people you heard talking about it were conservatives. That was it. Or if you watch political news, you saw that Trump has signed an executive order making Columbus Day reinstated as a federal holiday. Other than that, like I didn't see anyone on the left even talking about it other than just to bash him saying he was a such and such and such and such. And again, I used to say that this is I mean, I used to say this stuff 30, 35 years ago. So um but like I said, now as an adult, I realized a few things. One, there's no squeaky clean nation that doesn't have dirt under its, that doesn't have, dirt in the origins of its of these current nations today. Two, you can't you can't foster a healthy citizenry when they're taught in their youth to hate the very nation that they are a part of. That doesn't make sense. Three, um, we need to like look back over Columbus and the other American explorers and see why he did discover America. So first of all, yeah, let's put the obvious out there. He wasn't the first one to discover America. Obviously, obviously the first ones were the indigenous Native Americans. the American Indians, right? They were folks who came along the Bering Strait, which was the land bridge, um, which connected, um, modern day Siberia to Alaska. Um, and they came over from there. And looking at their genes, a lot of these folks are most similar related, Mrs. Contrarian, to Southeast Asians. So these many of these people, like you look at their genetic roots, they come from some people from southern China, but they are of Southeast, but not, but they're, even though they came from South China, they're not like, they're not they're not more, they're more closely related to Southeast Asians, not to the modern day Han, Chinese, which are the main ethnic group in China, the Han Chinese. Instead, these people were related to people from southern China of Southeast Asian origin. Okay. Um, on top of that, we now also have some archaeological evidence that Pacific Islanders made it to South America, at least as far as islands off the coast of South America. I would say, um, on the Pacific side, not the Atlantic side, on the Pacific side of South America, there is evidence that Pacific Islanders made it that far in to South America. Now, there's other stories, and again, we talked about this back in high school, um, as well as college, and they don't really bear the evidence for them are very little. So the alleged there's the alleged uh, story that someone from dynastic China, I can't remember his name, but it was supposed to be an explorer from dynastic China who made his way to America. But there's really no hard evidence of it. Like the evidence is the evidence is tendentious that there was a Chinese explorer from the dynastic era of China who made it to the New World. Also, there's this constant blabbering by the conscious woke Hotep Umar type people who keep claiming that the first Americans were actually black, that the statues of the ancient Olmecs were, because the Olmecs were a native group in Mexico and Central America that predated the Mayans. Like they were the bigger civilization before the Mayan culture in Mesoamerica. And because some of these statues depicted people with broad noses and full lips, this has been used to claim that ancient Africans made it to America. Again, that evidence is tendentious. When I say tendentious is just a academic way of saying it. It, it's circular reasoning. Like it's tendentious evidence because the very you're like because you're making a claim based on an observation that that itself needs explaining, but you're using you're using the observation as evidence itself of the very claim that's being made through that observation. It's circular, and that's why I say that's tendentious evidence. Non-tendentious evidence is when you get evidence outside of the very claim being made. So, for instance, if you make a, and I'm not trying to get religious here on on this live stream, we can do it on another day. But for instance, when you make a biblical claim, right? You make a claim based on something that is taught about in the Bible, and then as a source as a source of evidence for that claim, you point back at the Bible. That is tendentious evidence because you're using because the claim is being made by the very evidence that itself needs to be explained by other evidence, right? That's tendentious evidence. What would be non-tendentious evidence is then you have a biblical claim, right? And then you find a source outside of the Bible that points back at that claim made in the Bible. That would be a non-tendentious source of evidence. For for instance, the claim of Jesus' existence. If the only evidence for his existence came from the Bible itself, that would be tendentious evidence. But then when you can point back to to claims made by historians, and not just biblical writers or scholars, then it becomes non-tendentious when you can point back to people like Josephus and other folks and say, okay, well, this this Greek historian gives mentions this religious figure, Jesus, and here's another person, this Jewish scholar, um, points gives evidence outside of the Bible. So that would be non-tendentious evidence. So again, the problem with the Afrocentric Hotep claims that ancient Africans explored America is again the claims they are making are based on those very statues, but those statues themselves need explaining. They can't be the source of evidence for the claim. Because I heard we were Vikings too. I drew the line. I have not heard that one. That I wouldn't be surprised. Like I was saying this the other day on I believe Dennis Sperling's podcast when he was bringing this up, or I might have said it on his Facebook. I'm not sure, but it's like black people always trying to claim something that has nothing to do with being black. Like I was telling this to one of my homeboys as well, off camera. I was like, every generation we claim to be something else. I was like, I'm back when we was a kid, you had all the rappers and and conscious folks saying that we were Afro-Asiatic people. I don't know if you remember that. They, you have I remember even people like Big Daddy Kane and um, you know, African Bambaataa and the Zulu Nation and all those folks are like with Afro-Asiatic people and all this sort of crap. Then you had the Hebrew Israelites coming around saying we're the true Israelites, we were the lost tribes of Israel or whatever. I'm like, really? Sure. And 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 then I mean, and those dudes are so weird. They dress like Namekians from Dragon Ball Z. Like these niggas like dress like they Piccolo, like they about to go battle Goku, or that's Dragon Ball, but in Dragon Ball Z, I guess they're friends now. So I guess now he's raising Gohan for him while he's off fighting. But these niggas dressed like Piccolo, be downtown just bothering people, be having a Bible and be randomly spouting shit. And it's like always one guy spouting something on the bullhorn, and then he has a sidekick. He'd be like, yeah, in Leviticus 2 book 2 verses 1, they says, thou shalt be something, something, something. And then it'd be his sidekick be like, yeah, preach, man. Tell him about Leviticus. Tell him about Leviticus. Like, what the fuck? What the fuck are they doing? Like, why they like? First of all, why they dress like they off Dragon Ball, and they sitting there yelling shit on a bullhorn? And why does he need a sidekick? Like, what the fuck? I don't I don't know what part of being an Israelite that's from. I don't know. I don't remember that on Indiana Jones. I'm sorry. But anyway, moving on. So we went from Afro-Asiatic, then there's Hebrew Israelite, then then they were saying we were the true Native Americans, And like I said, a lot of these people point to the Olmec statues. The problem with pointing to art as evidence of someone's ethnic roots is that these people don't understand art. Art is not a one-on-one depiction of reality. That's not the purpose of art. Because people do the same thing with ancient Egyptian art, pointing to, well, these people are drawing black. They don't realize some of those figures in ancient Egypt were drawn black not because the people were of dark skin, because but it's represent it's not a one-on-one representation of those of what the people actually look like. Oftentimes, how people are drawn depicts certain concepts about the people that want to be presented. It's the same thing in anime. Like people criticize anime all the time, saying that why these Japanese people drawing white people, and I'm like, only to people in the Western world do they think these people are white people. In Japan, they don't look at those people as being white. It's drawn that way because that is the art form. Also, they have blonde hair and blue hair and stuff like that because that hair actually represents types of personality. Like if someone has like blue hair or silver hair, they in anime, that usually means they have some sort of magical nature. When they have very slanted eyes, that's in anime, that's usually to show that they are untrustworthy. When they have big full eyes, that's to show usually that they are um like wholesome or friendly or whatever. And it's the same thing with ancient art and other forms of contemporary art. There's not a one-on-one representation of the art to reality. The representation is can be very conceptual, and that goes back to ancient Egyptian art as well as Mesoamerican art. The Olmecs were not depicting black people. They had never came into contact with black people, and the Olmecs themselves were not black people who were displaced African explorers. There's no non-tendentious evidence of that. So again, there's no tendentious evidence that there was a Chinese explorer or pirate that came here. There's no evidence that ancient Africans explored here. There is evidence there were Pacific Islanders that made it to South America because we actually see some uh, um, not sculptures, but I guess like some artwork that made it here to the islands, like off the coast of I believe like Peru or something like that. Um, there, some of them has made it as far as inland to the mainland. Because again there might be some fossils of food that they've eaten. Uh, so we have Pacific Islanders, and obviously we have the American Indians. Um, and then there's the third group, which are the Vikings. We know they came here because uh, they would have explored from the Arctic into um, modern day Canada, into what's now in Greenland. They left, you know, they've first of all they wrote about their explorations. So we know of I think what Leif Erikson, I think that was his name. Leif Erikson is one of them, one of the explorers. We know they came into contact with with the natives of that in Greenland. I think those I don't know what they don't prefer being called natives in Canada typically don't prefer being called American Indian. I wish I wish Moonlit was here because he could talk more about that. He is from the Micmac uh, tribal nation, so he could talk more about that. Um, He might pop up. But yeah, I have not heard that black people were Vikings. And like I said, I wouldn't doubt it because in my joking with my friend and on the Dennis Sperling comment section, I was saying, watch, I said as soon as we discover like actual aliens, it's gonna be niggas talking about, we were the original aliens. That's why we don't look like anyone else here on the Earth. We have our unique features because we originally came from outer space. I guarantee black people will say that shit. Let look as soon as there's watch. I would bet money on this. I would bet my entire inheritance. Like, if we ever make first contact with an intelligent life form, outside of Earth, and I'm not talking about bacteria or mold or fungus, which is the most likely type of first encounter we'll have of some extraterrestrial life. But no, if we actually come into some like intelligent life form, like the Vulcans or whatever, watch niggas are gonna be like, well, we were the original aliens. That's why we live apart from all the other civilizations. That's why we're the only ones to have curly hair and brown skin and broad noses because we originally came from outer space. So we the original aliens. It's gonna be some. It's gonna be watch. It's gonna be some old tap saying that dumb shit. I would bet all money, like, because look, if they saying we were Vikings, it's I didn't even hear that, but I'm not even surprised anymore because they've already said that we were the original Native Americans. They said we were the original Israelites. They said we were the Afro-Asiatic peoples. Like, what what wouldn't they claim? If they, look, if they discovered that vampires and werewolves were here, they would be like, we were the original universal monsters. Like, they got the wolf man from the black man. Because if you spell W and you reverse the W, it looks like a B. And then you put the L before the O, and that's more like bluff man, which means black man. But that's how stupid they sound. I can't I can't stand those Afrocentric folks. And mind you, I was an Afrocentric person back when I was a teenager. I stopped when I was around 22 just because I, went off to college and actually got educated. And there's some educated Afrocentric people too, like Dr. Umar. He has a whole PhD. No, PsyD. Sorry, he has a PsyD, not a PhD. But he has a whole doctorate in psychology, and he's still a freaking fool. So anyway, Moon was he said Vikings, French, and Irish met First Nations people before Columbus. We traded food, animal skin, and tribe members for breeding and learning English. Well, Vikings, yes. The French and Irish, no. Like he he Columbus predates them on that. Remember, Columbus. What was the poem they used to Christopher Columbus something something sailed in 1492. I forgot how it goes, but yeah, he was the first one. He was after the Vikings. He was the first European explorer here in 1492. Again, he was a bit of navigate. Like if people didn't see my YouTube short, he was a bit of a navigational genius. He tinkered with uh, some device that was already being currently used by sailors at the time. I think he made some sort of um, correction to it to make it more precise. Do I have something on my? Yeah, thought that was just gray hair. Sorry. Um, but yeah, I mean, there was some things off about, you know, because the thing is now what they did have wrong as kids. They told us that he thought he landed in India. That wasn't exactly it. He thought he had landed in what's today modern day Indonesia, which back then they would have called the Spice Islands. That's why he referred to the people as Indians because he thought he landed in Indonesia, in modern day Indonesia. Because if you look at the the Arawak and Carib Indian people as they were depicted back when he first explored the islands of the Bahamas and the West Indies, they would have probably looked similar in dress, not to mention in body type to the Indonesians, because again, remember, like once they've done um, genetic testing of modern day American Indians, and their closest um, relatives overseas are Southeast Asians who crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia to Alaska. And these were people from southern China. So even though they were from southern China, they're more they were more closely related to Southeast Asians, not Han, the ethnic Han Chinese, which are the majority in China. Um, and so there's still a bunch of um, East Asian folks living in that region of in that region of Russia that look the same as Chinese folks or Native Americans. Like you, whatever they like, the only way you would know them apart from those other people would be based on what they wear, and of course, how they talk and whatever. But if you just looked at them and you placed them in like what might be seen as traditional, I don't know, imperial China clothing, you would think, oh, these people are Chinese. Or if you place them in what would look like, Mongolian or Hun type clothing, you would think, oh, they're Mongols or Huns. Likewise, if you place them in maybe Inuit uh, clothing, they will look like um, Alaskan natives. Or if you place them in, you know, Southwest Indian clothing, they will look like people from the Navajo or Hopi or Pueblo Indians or whoever. So, but yeah, that's so there's that, and then the other thing is the use of the word discover. So again, this used to grind my gears as a kid too, until again a professor, and I mentioned this in my YouTube short several days ago. A professor of philosophy set me straight on the word discovery. He was like, well, Columbus discovered America, and I remember I and someone else looked giving him the side. I'm like, I don't know about that. He didn't discover something if people already living there. He was like, well, no, look. He was like, look, discover can be used in different ways. He said, there's discover in the he did, there's discovery in the more moderate form, which means that you discovered something that you previously were unaware of. So in that sense, he's like, yeah, Columbus did discover America because that was something he was not aware that there was a new world. On top of that, at that time, despite the fact that Vikings had already explored the parts of the parts of the New World, particularly in Greenland, this and they've even wrote about it. Most people across Eurasia and Africa were unaware that the Vikings had been there. So it was literally Christopher Columbus' discovery that brought attention of the New World back to Europe and Asia and Africa. Like they did not know that the Vikings had already explored the New World. They didn't know that there were other people living in the New World. They didn't know there was a New World. Most people at the time, although they knew the world was round, they thought it was much smaller. They thought there was just one large ocean, you know, separate, that basically went from one side of, you know, Europe and Africa on one side all the way uh, to Asia and the oceanic um, countries on the other side. Like they were not aware about of all this other stuff. Again, it for like it was they didn't even know about the Philippines yet. Like that was Ferdinand Magellan that first discovered the Philippines, and you know, so which is weird because I would think if they knew about the Spice Islands, they would know about the Philippines. I could be wrong. Let me let me backtrack on that. Yeah, I'm correct. Yeah, Ferdinand Magellan discovered the Philippines afterwards, but they knew about the Spice Islands. But that's because there was a long intercontinental trade between Europe and Asia across the Silk Roads. So there were so although there were the Spice Islands, usually European explorers had to sail all the way across the continent of Africa on to India over to the Spice Islands. And this is why people like Christopher Columbus were so desperate to find a shortcut, thinking, well, he thought the globe was more egg shaped, not uh, spherical. He thought it was more egg shaped, and then in doing so, that if he just sailed across instead of Af- around the coast of continental Africa and on to like the Middle East and India, that would be a shortcut to getting to Southeast Asia, to the Spice Islands, aka Indonesia, modern day Indonesia. And so when he arrived in the West Indies, he thought he made it to Indonesia and named those folks after the Indians, because at the time there were Hindu kingdoms that that um, there were kingdoms that were running huge parts of Indonesia and the Philippines at the time. Like you still see there are still like Hindu temples in parts of Indonesia and the Philippines. Of course, Ferdinand Magellan got his ass handed to them in Mindanao, which is the southernmost part of the Philippines, but that's a different story for another day. Akron says we claim everything but rainbow activities, but I thought we started everything. Oh, some of them claim the rainbow activities that, well, we won't go there today. Carlin said he discovered it for himself. Yeah, like I said, he did discover it for himself, but but there's an important sense that he discovered it for the old world as well, because like I said, even though the Vikings had already been there and had contact with the Native Americans, this was not well known to the rest of Europe, much less to Asia and Africa. So it wasn't until Columbus discovery that it became more. This actually became very well known to the rest of the world. So besides that, I mean, it's like we didn't, even though the Vikings had already made contact with the natives, had even written about it. First of all, most people weren't literate back then. So that was number one. Two, we didn't have like the modern methods of historiography, and we didn't have like newspapers and magazines to like spread the word back then, since the printing press hadn't been invented back then. There was no printing press. Most people were illiterate, and on top of that, it would have been written in the language that common folk wouldn't have been able to read anyway. so, so this is why most people were unaware of the New World, except for like some explorers who knew of Greenland. But outside of that, like this was this was new. Besides that, Columbus died thinking he still made it to Southeast Asia. He didn't realize he didn't understand the import of his discovery until others did it. Like America got named after another explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, another Italian explorer. And so this is why some Italians lashed out at people trashing Christopher Columbus, because to him, Christopher Columbus is a hero to many Italian Americans, like remember on Sopranos, Tony Soprano said, he said, here in this house, he said, Christopher Columbus discovered America. He was an Italian hero, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. So Tony Soprano's kind of right. Like I said, it was both Christopher Columbus and Amerigo Vespucci, both Italian explorers, both have put their stamp on modern day America. And this was especially important for Italians because, let's be honest, up until the mid 20th century, they weren't even considered white. Like a lot of people forget, Italians were, there used to be signs up the US, people forget, like Irish and Italians were treated harshly. There used to be signs up that used to say, no dogs, no Irish, no Italians, no niggas. So one of the reasons Italian Americans latched on to Christopher Columbus so much is because it Americanized them more, being that the person who discovered America was an Italian explorer. So Moon says apparently everyone whom I've met far more knowledgeable about it will say Vikings were very well received. Columbus newborn savages and ended newborn savages on the rocks and threw them into the ocean. So, and I'm gonna get into the problems with Columbus in a second, but I just want to establish just some stuff first. He says Columbus and Thanksgiving are things we very much dislike. How it's mistaught. Again, Wikipedia is only just catching up. I would not take any information from Wiki. Well, usually when I go to Wikipedia, if I do look something up, then I also look at the links at the bottom for where they've gotten their information, because anyone can write on Wikipedia or edit, or once an article is put on Wikipedia, anyone can edit it. So um, get some water. Carlton says, imagine if Columbus didn't try to take a shortcut, the world would probably look very different. Well, I think the old world would have eventually discovered the new world, America, but the trajectory of history would have been much different. First of all, we don't know who were the first, whom would have been the first to come. More than likely, it still would have been the Spanish and Portuguese, just because they were the main, they were the biggest, um, empires at the time. Like Spain was at its full, was dominating the sea at the time. Like there was different eras where the British were the supreme on the sea. Um, the Spanish were, the French were, um, and other nations, but more than likely, somewhere around the if Columbus didn't do it, I still believe somewhere around the 16th century, more than likely there would have been some Spanish explorers that came by. Because remember, like after Christopher Columbus discovery, then you had people like Ferdinand Magellan, Hernan Cortez, um, Francisco Pizarro. Um, what's the guy who discovered Hernando Soto? He's another evil one. um, and I more than likely Spain and his Spain, or if not Spain, some other Western European nation, um, in their desperation to find more resources, probably would have made this their way to the New World anyway, more than likely. But the history trajectory definitely would have been probably a lot different than it was now. But yeah, I want to get into another thing. Is that another critique is that they'll say, oh well, he got to the New World, but he only explored the West Indies and the Bahamas. He never made it to the mainland. That's actually not true. He actually did make it to the mainland. So he did actually make it to South America itself, to the South American mainland. However, I think by the time he made it to the mainland, Amerigo Vespucci had already touched the mainland. But he did make it to the mainland. The first place he did land though was in the West Indies, but he did actually make it to the mainland. Um, Mullen says no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Carlos says Portugal. Yeah, so um, more like I said, more than likely some Spanish or Portuguese exploration would have made it here. Yes, I know he sailed under the Portuguese, but I was saying the Spain was the main were the main folks back then. And by the way, I'm just claiming he's Italian because there is some disagreement on what his actual ethnic background was. I'm just going to go with the conventional wisdom and just say he's Italian. I'm not going to get into what exact Italian city state he's from. People say he was um, Genoan. I think is that was Genoan. I think, but then some people say yeah he was from Genoa, but that doesn't necessarily mean he was ethnically Italian. That he could have been such and such and such and such. I'm not getting into all that. I'm just going to say conventionally, Christopher Columbus was Italian. Whether he was actually from Genoa or some other Italian city state, whether being from the Italian city state, he wasn't a native of that city state. Not going to delve that far into it. You guys can if you like. Get some water. um, but yeah, and so we can get into the controversies. Like I said, I don't sugarcoat history. I think if you teach, I think you can teach people to love America or love American history while still pointing out its flaws. I think I think that's the honest way to do it. Like obviously for little kids, you kind of have to edit that stuff out because that wouldn't be appropriate for little kids. Like when they taught us as kids about certain things um like the American Revolution when they talked about how they tarred and feathered the British redcoats. As kids, they made it sound like that was like something real funny, like oh they tarred and feathered them, ha ha ha. Then you realize, in high school or maybe even middle school, then when they tarred and feathered these people, that was them actually murdering them because you're pouring hot tar on people and then throwing feathers on them afterwards. That was just a gruesome murder. So, in the similar vein with Christopher Columbus, it wouldn't have been appropriate to teach kids that when he sailed to America and discovered these people and interacted with them, what he and or his crew may have done to these people, because that's not for a child's ears to hear. Um, so, like his folks abused the women, they murdered the folks, uh, they pillaged. they pillaged their towns, um, and they looked for gold and silver and enslaved those people to basically pluck their resources so they could send it to back to Europe. Uh, See, this is probably the difference between them and the Vikings. If the Vikings had plundered and pillaged and did all that sort of stuff, then maybe it would have gained more notoriety in Europe. But being that I don't think Greenland would have been a rich source of resources like the Caribbean was, that didn't happen. Also, I think they brought back some of these slaves to Europe as well. And of course, through Christopher Columbus' voyages, his crew spread smallpox, which swept through the New World and allegedly killed as many as, by some reports, smallpox and other European infectious diseases may have killed 2/3 of the population by the time the French and British settlers came to the New World. See, the thing, so that was another reason why natives often weren't kept long term as slaves in the South, in colonial America the way blacks were. Black Africans were more immune to European infectious diseases than the natives were. Um, for whatever reason, these diseases weren't as communicable to Black Africans as they were to the natives. But a messy, but something messy again about American history is that not only Black Africans were kept as slaves, there were some Europeans kept as slaves. So a lot of people deny this because sometimes people try to use it to try to downplay the the atrocities of the American slavery era. But it is a fact of matter that there were some Europeans kept as slaves as well as Native Americans. And in the Caribbean, there were even Chinese, there were even like people, Chinese and Indians sometimes kept as slaves in the West Indies as well. This is why in the West Indies there are many people who are multiracial, who have multiracial ancestry in the West Indies, because those they pretty much enslaved everyone on those sugar plantations in the Caribbean. These plantations were like very lucrative, made super turned Europeans super wealthy in the Caribbean, with these sugar cane plantations and stuff like that. And they had Indians working it, they had Chinese working it. Uh, if you don't believe me, like you can look up the history of Cuba. Like there were there's a Chinatown in Cuba for folks who don't know, because there have been Chinese in Cuba since you know they they first started Europeans started settling there, and they brought some Chinese and enslaved them there. So unless smallpox was COVID before COVID. I mean, well, smallpox is still around. It's just we got vaccinations for it. Um, but again, like I said, the problem with smallpox was that the natives then didn't have a natural immunity to it because they had never been before exposed to it. Even though most Black Africans had never been exposed to it, again, it was less. Uh, it it didn't affect them, so they could be amongst Europeans without succumbing to communicable diseases that Europeans had. This is why many of the Spanish conquistadors often uh, had Africans within their crew, either as slaves or as freedmen or indentured servants. The most famous one is the black Spanish conquistador Estevanico. which is again why foundational Black Americans say, "Hey, we were here first," because I mean, we literally had Black people coming to America before there was an America, because we had them often coming with the Spanish explorers like Estevanico. But the other claims, that we were here first as Native Americans, that's just bullshit. There was no Black Native Americans. We need to stop that. And like I said, the whole idea that the Olmec statue depicts blacks, they need to stop doing that, because those statues are not a one-on-one representation of the people. So Amon says, "Don't take the blankets from Columbus." No, that well, that happened later. That was not Columbus. You're confusing two different points of history. Either they'll take blankets from Columbus or clothes, either lemon or lime too. LOL. Vitamin C will help with scurvy. Yeah, the whole blanket thing, that happened 2 centuries later. That was not under Columbus. They didn't intentionally spread smallpox because they didn't know back then that you know that would even happen. That was that was a later um, weaponization of that came about a century or two later, when they basically weaponized infectious diseases against the natives. They didn't know that back then. Carlton says Africans and Europeans have been in contact with each other for thousands of years, so our immune systems are used to each other's diseases. Um, that I mean, that could be the case, but we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa. Most sub-Saharan Africans never had contact with Europeans. It just, like I said, it was just the case that sub-Saharan Africans, Black Africans, were less, um, were less susceptible to their diseases, just like they. But I don't think it's because it was like more contact between them. Like there has been some contact between sub-Saharan Africans and Europeans prior to the European slave trade, but it was very limited. Like I said, most sub-Saharan Black people of the African continent never had contact with Europeans or knew anything about them prior to the late 1400s or 1500s. Um, Especially when you're talking about the interior of Africa. And mind you, we had our own diseases as well. And by the way, the fact that there's certain diseases within ethnic groups basically harks back to the fact that race is a biological classification. It's not simply a you know a social, what they call it, a social I'm sorry, it's late. I forgot what's the term, guys, when you say something is just a social, what you might call it. But yeah, I mean, obviously there is some biological reality to racial classification. It's just that the way we typically try to um, demarcate races is usually superficial, based on just skin color and appearance, where it's more than that. You have to look at it through like population genetics, because obviously there are some ethnic groups that have predis- genetically predisposed to certain disorders that others aren't, like Jewish people and Tay-Sachs disease, Black people with um, what's that disease that we often have, and even with me with phenylketonuria or PKU, that is not a disease usually Black people have. This is usually a disease that is more common in non-Black people, which basically means that this that this disorder that I have, PKU, which is a genetic metabolic disorder, is going to be more stemming from my non my non African ancestry. Um, Probably from the European ancestry, because most of my whereas most of my ancestry is Black African, about 79%. Another the other 19% is European, and then about 1% is Neanderthal. So social construct. Yep, that's thank you. Sickle cell. Yep, sickle cell anemia. So black people, particularly I think West African black people. I'm not sure if it's all black Africans or just West Africans, but West African people in particular are susceptible to sickle cell anemia. Um, I forgot which one of TLC has it. I think it's T-Boz, right? T-Boz has sickle cell anemia. Um, and like I said, many Jewish folks have Tay-Sachs disease. Um, then I forgot what disease they think Abraham Lincoln had. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think they tried to claim he had Klinefelter's disease, if that's the correct name of it, Klinefelter's. But yes, the fact that there's certain genetic disorders that are predisposed to certain ethnic groups points back to the fact that race can't simply be a social construct. You don't have this is why even in medical school they teach race-based medicine, because they realize that certain groups have different medical needs. And remember, if something needs biomedical intervention, that means it's biological. Same thing with like gender. If to get gender affirming care, you need to actually go through biomedical treatment, that means the gender is not a social construct. So obviously there has to be something biological about it. And so, and I've talked about this ad nauseum, so I won't retread that territory. But I've done previous live streams talking on that 2 years ago. But anyway, getting back to Columbus and discovery and all this sort of stuff. So yes, again, the reason why history is often seems inaccurate in American history is because when you're being taught this stuff as little kids, it's kind of inappropriate to tell them about the grisly details. To like, you shouldn't be teaching 6 and 7 year olds that the explorers raped and murdered and committed arson and robbed people and enslaved them, and all this sort of stuff. Similar with the American Revolution. The 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 the, the, the revolutionaries, some of the stuff they did was quite problematic. Like I said, the tar and feathering thing, like it sound like, I remember as a kid, I thought that was something funny. Like, oh, they put tar on them and feathers. They run because that made me think, oh, they were running around looking like they were on blackface with a bunch of chicken feathers on them, because that's kind of how it was depicted in those little elementary school history books. Then I realized, as a teen, that was murder, because you're pouring like tar on someone, which probably would have, if it got in their mouths, would have caused them asphyxiation right there, if not, as well as poisoning. But even if not, yeah, from what I understand, they were pouring hot tar on them, which burned those people alive, and then poured feathers on them to just to mock them. Like, that was pretty gruesome. And there was other things that we that the revolutionaries did too that was problematic. Like, there was one point where King George was pretty much trying to like squash the like squash the dissent. But at this time, the Americans are already like, nah, we just gonna we now we want the smoke. Like there was a point where King George was actually trying to acquiesce and put an end to to the to the revolt, but it was again the American revolutionaries saying no, this is like we're just gonna keep going. We want the smoke, and kept pushing things. Basically, they pushed it to the point where there could be war, um, because that was the only way they saw resolution was bringing it to a full scale war. But there was points, like I said, there was like at least 2 points, if not more, during during the lead up to the Revolutionary War where King George was actually trying to end this crisis. So when you look back at it, it's very problematic, but at the same time, if you only point out like history has to be there has to be a balance in how you teach it. Like if you only teach the good things, then people will grow mistrustful of public education and just see it as a tool of propaganda. But if you only teach the negative things, then people will grow up with an active hate of their own nation, and that's not healthy to the stability of a nation for its youth to be taught to hate that very nation. It has to be a balance. You can teach, look, this is who our founders are. This is what happened. This is what led up to now, and this is why it's a good thing. But at the same time, these people were flawed individuals and they did very bad things in the lead up to starting a new nation. That would be the balance. And again, that comes in later stages of of education because like I said in the very beginning, like kindergarten or pre-K, like if you went to pre-K like I did, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, it'd be kind of inappropriate to talk about murder and rape to little kids. You can bring that on in middle school and further in high school, but to think that those things shouldn't be taught at an early age is not propaganda. That's just being mindful of childhood education methodology. So Mullins is the Atari and Feather in this Nightmare Fuel Nasty documentary on it. Yeah, yeah. Once I like I said, once as a teenager, I figured I found out exactly what that was. I was like, oh no, that was actual torture. That wasn't just being like they as an elementary school kid they basically taught it like it was just a bunch of little it was just some little a bit of mischief on the part of the colonialists, the American colonialists. But no, that this look this was torture. This was a form of torture. Then on top of that, um, there was a lot of back and forth between the uh, the revolutionaries and the loyalists, um, because there were still many Americans who still considered themselves British, um, and so there was some mistreatment of the loyalists, I should say. But anyway, I want to bring this back to Columbus and the other explorers. So a lot of another problem with talking about Columbus and the other explorers and how they are just painted as inherently evil is that it also reinforces what's called the noble savage myth. The noble savage myth is this thing done often on the political left where instead of seeing non-white people as as people like anyone else. They are instead like put on a pedestal and seen as these noble savages, as these people who lived in pre-modern societies. And so- because these folks were living in pre-modern societies, they didn't they didn't they had they bore none of the social ills of modern civilization, which is just not true. um like there's often this incorrect depiction of Native American culture and civilization as being this happy-go-lucky point in history prior to Columbus' arrival, and that's just not true. What the fact of the matter is, before the America was colonized, there was unending tribal warfare. I mean, even when you get into the Mesoamerican civilizations and the Incan civilizations to the south of Mesoamerica, the these empires were built on warfare. The reason why Cortez was able to dismantle the Mayans and the Aztecs so easily was because the other tribes that they held under their empires were very unhappy with how they were being treated, like, you know, ritual sacrifice, uh, and other grisly things. We even we have fossils of mummified people from the Incan civilization, from the Incan Empire. I remember seeing either on, I think on National Geographic, the fossil of a mummified Incan girl who was sacrificed. So it was easy for Pizarro to bring down the Incan Empire, and Hernando Soto to bring down the Mayans and Aztecs, because they were already many of the people within those empires were already dissatisfied with with the status quo, and so they basically did they in many of these places they did what we know as divide and conquer. This works when you are because these pre-modern societies are not utopias. Like the noble savage myth incorrectly depicts these people as living in some sort of utopia free from the ills of modern civilization, and that's just not true. There was very little laws except for the laws of their you know the chief warlord or the high priest, whoever was in charge of these empires. There was also an empire. We don't know of too many empires of North America except for the Cahokian Empire. The Cahokian Empire would have been around where modern day Cherokees now were from. They even had like a huge mound similar to the pyramids in Mesoamerica, and I think there's you can still see some remnants of these Cahokian Empire mounds in parts of the American South. I think around I want to say like what um, between somewhere like Georgia, or Alabama, or Mississippi, or Tennessee, one of those four states, somewhere around there. You will see there's still um, a little bit of little some artifacts left of the Cahokian Empire, but the North Americans weren't as technically savvy as the folks to the south of them in Mesoamerica. And this gets into part of the title of this stream: Guns, Germs, and Steel, Discovery, and Columbus' discovery of America. I used that title purposely because it's also the name of a great book that you guys should read if you're interested more in the discovery of America and basically how Europeans basically colonized most of the world. It's the book is called Gun, Germs, and Steel. The author is Jared Diamond. He uses both geography, um, particularly he gives an historical account of what happened through biogeographical means, because history sometimes can be a little less. History tends to lack scientific rigor, so to make it more scientifically rigorous, he used methods of biogeography, and he called it Guns, Germs, and Stills because these were basically the things that were used by European conquerors or explorers, if you rather, to other parts of the world. Not to mention, he mentions how if you look at how Eurasia's own geographic makeup basically led to civilization dominating, um, basically led to how more technological civilizations arose in Eurasia as opposed to other parts of the world like Africa, um, North America, South America, Australia, or other parts of Asia. Like um, it was the Eurasian region that had the most cross contamination of different ideas, both technological, not to mention sh- sharing of resources and so forth, horses, uh, um, the forging, learning how to forge steel, which made more superior weapons over wood and rocks and or even other forms of metal like bronze and bronze and iron. Steel was king. Then you had guns. Once we learned firearms, well, I think gunpowder was originally invented in China, but I think the gun was perfected, later in Europe. But like I said, there was a cross contamination of ideas and resources and other things across Eurasia because of like the Silk Road trade. Not to mention there was similar geography in different parts of the in those parts of the world. And obviously germs we get into, like I said again, smallpox and other things like that, communicable diseases that can be weaponized against other people. So, um, but yeah. So it. I know I've been chatting a lot. Did anyone else have any thoughts on that? Because I know some people might not agree with everything I said. That's cool. Um, but I'm gonna take a water break. And I've thought of an idea, guys. So I'm going to start doing this. Uh, at least for now, I thought of this cool idea. Every, so for any live stream, if I get 10, if I um if I get 10 10 super chats, I will give every time I get at least 10 super chats, I will teach a martial arts technique. Every time I get 10 super chats. But only if I get 10 at least 10 super chats. Every time I get 10 super chats, I will give you guys some free martial arts um, tool as in technique. And like I said, once I reach 10,000, I am going to teach you guys the the Bruce Lee's famous 1 inch punch. By the way, he did not invent the 1 inch punch, but he made it famous. So I want to make that clear that he didn't invent this, but he did make it famous. I believe the roots of the 1 inch punch come from Wing Chun. Someone can fact check me on that. But in any case, like I said, when I hit 10,000 subs, that will be because I did ask this in my in the YouTube uh, wall, my YouTube commentary feed wall, whatever the post, whatever they want to call it now. Um, and only a few people voted, the the majority pointed to wanting me to teach the 1 inch punch. So when I hit 10,000 subs, that will be I'm going to do a whole video just teaching the 1 inch power punch. It's both a 1 inch punch and a 3 inch punch, and I'm going to show people how to do it and how you can train yourself to do it. Um, but that's for the future. For right now, like I said, every time I do a stream and I get at least 10 super chats, I will teach a free martial arts technique. I have not received 10 yet. I think the most I've gotten in a stream was maybe five. I believe five was the most I've received in one time. But but like I said, that will be my new thing going forward today. Is that every time I get 10 at least 10 super chats. And that includes like the that includes also like the gifs. It doesn't have to be um, like a comment. It can be also like one of those gifs or one of the gems, the super gems, which gives like a little animated thing across that everyone in the chat room can see. So whichever one which any of the supers, there's the super chat, the super the super gems, or the other one. Um, any of those supers. Now the super thanks doesn't count because you can only give a super thanks once the video has already been um, posted for replay. But I would still very much appreciate a super thanks. Like if someone sends me a super thanks, um, watching this on replay, you can put in a request for me to show a martial arts technique, and I'll do it. Um, but it, if it's something that I know, of course, like don't ask me to do something I don't know how to do, like a 720 kick. Like I wish I could do a 720 kick. At best, I can do a cheat 720 kick, but I haven't tried that in a year now, so I will have to practice that. I can do a 540, but again, I haven't done a 540 in a while, so I will still have to practice my 540 kick. But if it's something simple like a jab, a check hook, uh, a overhand right, a teep kick, a, a switch kick, a flying side kick, a helicopter kick, which is my favorite technique, by the way. The helicopter kick is the kick Van Damme made famous. That's my favorite technique. Um, that just goes to show that I have cross trained in multiple arts. But in any case, guys, because I'm about to end this, I'm just saying. So going forward, every time I get at least 10 supers, whether a super chat or a super gem or whatever, During the live stream, I will teach a technique at the end of the stream. But if you send me a super thanks on replay, once this video is no longer live, you can put in a request for a certain technique, and if it's something that I know, I will show it. So other than that, um, I was there any questions, like I said, on Columbus or the other explorers or Gun, Germs, and Steel, which I said is also a book by the scientist Jared Diamond, who gives a biogeographical account of how Europeans ended up dominating most of the world. Um, and it gives a much more scientific explanation than just a simple historical documentation. It gives like an accounting of this through geography and and biology, and so it's a very good book. I read this, mm, say about 15 four, about 14 years ago. It's really good. I think I kept that book too. I do. I gotta check. I think I do have that in my books. I think I have. I think I actually do own that book. I have to check. If so, if I'm gonna check if I have that book, and if I do have it, and you guys have more questions on gun germs and steel, I will dig into into my books, into my because I have a bunch of books boxed up here because I simply don't have room on my shelf, and eventually I am going to ship all these books over to the Philippines to my actual house. So I'm just keeping them in the boxes for now, since I don't plan on putting them up on the shelf. The current shelves that you guys have seen before are too flimsy to hold a lot of books. I constructed these shelves myself years ago, but it's one of these cheap IKEA setups, so they're not very flimsy. And they used to have too many books on them already, which is what kind of made them fragile. So for the nuts, I am keeping all my stuff in my boxes. But if people are more interested in knowing exactly how Jared Diamond explains the European conquest of of most of the world outside of Europe, um, I will dig that out the crates, so to speak. Out my boxes. I only have one crate of books. I do have, which are my comic books, but for that, I will check. I will double check to see if I actually own that book. So I think it's one of those books that when I was a library clerk, I ended up keeping for myself, um, with the permission of the librarian, of course. Like some books um, were taken out of rotation because they didn't fare well. So then we could claim them. This was a very small library. This wasn't like a main county library. So most of these books were through donations. So anyway, uh, I don't see any other comments unless I need to fix my filter. So if that's the case, then I'm gonna end this here. But again, people watching this on replay um, can can be free to um, leave comments, and I will reply to them if there's something that will add to the conversation. And again, if you want to leave me a super thanks, much appreciated, and you can put in a request for a martial arts technique for another live stream. So, with that being said, I don't see any other comments. If so, I'm going to end it here. I'll give it a few seconds just in case someone's writing something. Do a podcast. What do you mean? I mean, this is pretty much a podcast. I mean, it's a live stream, but oh, debating people. Well, um, I don't, I don't know how many people are local to me that are doing podcasts, but if someone wants me to come onto their podcast, I would do so. And I'll do it for free. They would just have to pay to fly me into where they are. Since I'm a very, I'm not one of these big YouTubers that can fly on their own dime, but I would do it for free as long as they would just pay for that airfare. I would definitely be on someone's podcast because that would help me grow, my image as well. So I'll be more than happy to be on anyone's podcast for free. Just pay me just take care of the airfare. Because as a beginning YouTuber, you can't be asking for like 10 bands like some of these, like I'm not like some of these guys that just for being on someone's podcast, they can ask for like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000. I'm like, wow, what main issue would I debate on? I, obviously, you don't watch my channel. Like, you would have to you would have to know my channel to know what I talk about. Like, I talk about philosophy, science, um, pol- political news. Um, I talk about comic books and superheroes, and I talk about martial arts, and I talk about traveling overseas to find better women. So these are the things that I usually make conversation about on my channel. Um, so I mean, like I said, if someone, I'd be more than happy to be on someone's podcast. And when it comes to like martial arts, I don't want to get into like pedantic debates over who's the best martial artist or something silly like that. Like that's kind of juvenile. I don't mean anything juvenile. Like, I mean, if we're talking about martial arts, like what arts people like to practice, you know, their training methods, um, who they think are the best competitors right now, stuff like that. That would be cool. But nothing silly like, well, Bruce Lee did it like this. Like, no, I don't want to get to anything silly like that. Like I said, this current live stream again was me giving a sort of a modest defense of of the reinstatement of Columbus Day this year because I think we got to sometimes you got to give people their credit even if they are very flawed individuals. Yeah, I don't want to talk about martial arts because that's not really the point of this stream today. Like if if I usually don't go into a different topic unless someone wants to drop a super chat or something. But yeah, I'd be more than happy to debate people on those sorts of issues um, on a different day, and I'll be more than happy to guest appear on someone's podcast, either virtually or in person. If it's in person, they just pay the airfare, and I'll do it for free. If it's virtual, I'll be more than happy to do a virtual one as long as it doesn't interfere with, you know, as long as it's during um, a reasonable hour. So in any case, that's for anyone. That's for any other YouTubers listening, because I have one or two folks that watch who also have channels as well. Well, several actually, who have their own channels who watch me. But in any case, I'm going to end this unless someone has actual questions about the topic that this is about, which is again guns, germs, and steel, and Christopher's Columbus discovery of America. That's what this live stream is about. So if people aren't going to talk about that, we're not going to go into some little loopy artistic type uh, diversion into random topics. I don't do that. Not on this channel. You got to drop super chats for that. um, so looks like there's not going to be any of that. Um, and again, for people here, like I said, going forward for this live stream and any other stream in the future until I change it. If someone if I get 10 super chat, at least set 10 super chats for that live stream, I will show the chat room a martial arts technique, but only if I get at least 10. Um, that didn't happen today, so I won't be showing one. But going forward, if people want to see something, if I get 10 super chats, I will display a martial arts technique and explain how it's used. I'm not talking about martial arts because you're not dropping a super chat. So have a good day.